Hi, I'm Dan Kubisky, co-chair of the Society of Professional Journalists International Community. We in the international community have long encouraged more and regular reporting from places around the world. Unfortunately, news budgets being what they are, large portions of the world are ignored until there's a war or natural disaster. Unfortunately, Ethiopia fits into that category of sporadic coverage. With me today is Sadie Aragi, and correct
Sade,
me
Sade,
again,
Sade Arage.
Sade Aragi, I apologize,
No worries.
founder of Mosab Times, an online news service that reaches out to the Ethiopian diaspora, as well as anyone else interested in learning more about this country, its people, and its culture. Now, I should mention that Sadie was a student of mine at George Mason University, and I am very proud of the work that she has done in film, video, and print since graduating. So let's get started here. About 3 years ago, you wrote that you wanted to warn media outlets and readers alike about the biased narrative that is circulating and dangers of hate speech surrounding the situation in Ethiopia. There continues to be strife and a hard life for Ethiopians, but there is also so much more to Ethiopia than conflict. Your news service seems to look beyond the occasional coverage that we get from Northern Hemisphere media. So tell us about Mosab Times and what your goals are for it.
Okay. Thank you again. It's great to have you, Professor Dan. Thanks for inviting me to talk about my site, and my online publication. Basically, I would say that it comes from, so I'm first generation, right? And I feel like there is a disconnect in terms of when you're trying to navigate through understanding the country. And I've traveled to Ethiopia quite a few times through at different ages. So for me, it's twofold, right? It's about first generation Ethiopians who may feel disconnected, or they want to read about content, and a lot of the times the content is inward facing in most cases, right? So the coverage that they are going to have or available to them would be like YouTube videos, things like that, where it's strictly reported in one language, or not in English. And so there's so many people who don't understand fully Amharic or other languages to be able to follow along, right? So for me, I feel like we need to have another option where there are language options, which is one of the things that I have on my site, where depending on the content and depending on the topic, I might add additional languages. Like, for instance, the one about the indentured servants, the 500,000 women who are being, pretty much migrating to Saudi. There's an agreement with Ethiopian government and Saudi government. What does that look like in English? I did a lot of research around that. It's a story I've covered in the past, and I have it in Arabic and Amharic, so different people can go in and either watch, and eventually I'm also going to have audio files for people to listen to. So for me, it's about first generation Ethiopians here in the diaspora who are disconnected to their culture. They might understand the music side of things, and music is easy, right? You don't really have to understand what's going on, but to navigate in your country and to be able to have a real impact in your country, and the narratives that are being told about who you are and your identity affect you on a micro and a macro level, right? So I want to be a part of that conversation, because I don't see that happening in with a lot of news outlets, right? They
Mhm.
might have a very biased slant, and I'm saying, okay, you're the one who's paying for that. And it's just like a movie. If someone decides to finance a film, they're telling their perspective of that story. It might not include a lot of, it's not going to be all inclusive, right? It's about whatever narrative that they want to tell. So in terms of narratives, as you mentioned earlier, one of my biggest concerns was that the people that they were choosing to have or bring on as a subject matter expert are very involved in the whole ethnic politics. And I think that that's unfair, to not vet someone and then or acknowledge the fact that that's what they're gonna have. Like if they have a flag in the background and it's not a national flag and they are representing another, subgroup within the country, and you're saying, okay, you can talk about the whole country. No, you can't, because you're really biased to a certain group and to a certain ideology, which really doesn't cover the whole gamut, and you shouldn't be the person chosen to speak for a whole group of people when that's not what you represent. So those are the kind of things that I kept seeing in the media that I was just like, okay, let's take a step back and let's just rethink and reshape this narrative so that not only our inward community, but people from other communities who are interested in what's going on in Ethiopia or want to hear a perspective that's kind of like well-rounded, can come to and understand that, yes, we are going to talk about topics that are maybe considered controversial, or are not necessarily everything gets politicized, but it might not be politics. But we are not going to shy away from talking about those things when they're happening in real time, right? The other thing that I think I saw a lot in the media was that the geopolitics, right? So people don't understand regional issues and where these different regions, like, it's all lumped up into one thing, because I mean, we're the ones who kind of can navigate and understand, oh, okay, this was part of this area and this was part of this area, but no one from the outside will understand. To them, it's all the same. And what exactly is going on, and why would there be any conflict associated with this region? So it goes a little deeper. So to even understand on a basic level what the maps look like and how they have changed and transitioned from, for the past few decades is a lesson on its own, basically. So giving the context is really important. And I feel that many of the things I read about in the news were like, there was no context. And I'd be like, how can you talk about this without talking about first giving people some sort of foundation, right? So I feel like you can feel free to have your own slant on things, but at least give people a proper foundation so they understand what it is that you're referring to. And I felt that I kept seeing things over and over again, where this was like it was a systemic thing. So to me, it was like, was it carelessness, or was it just like, well, I mean, it's just not important enough for us to spend that much time, and we're not going to do the research? Or is it a way of just like adding to the disinformation that was out there? And so that's what I think, just let's take a step back. Let's look at the big picture. And, I'm a nationalist. And so I believe that a nation cannot exist without understanding that they have to stand as one nation, pretty much, in order to survive. Their survival is integral to the understanding of their nationalism. You can't, I mean, you don't see anyone around here holding up a Maryland flag like, I want to secede from, from the 50 states, because I don't like, I mean, I know Texas has done that, but you know what I'm saying. Generally speaking, it's just something that people throw around in discussion. It's not a real thing, right? And they're not. They may have local loyalty, loyalty to their local area, and a certain kind, because of their lineage and things like that, which is fine. But that doesn't mean that you have to completely like derail the whole structure of a nation.
Right.
And so that is what I have, like with ethnic federalism, the effects of ethnic federalism is what we are seeing, basically. So
right. I think, for a lot of coverage of the various countries in Africa, that ethnic issue seems to be the weakest. I mean, from what little I know, and I never pretend to be an expert, of that part of the world. I mean, for many Americans, they don't even understand that Africa is not a country. It is a continent of multiple countries and multiple ethnic groups. You mentioned the importance of identifying the when the experts are talking or people are talking about issues in Ethiopia, to identify their maybe their biases or their affiliations. How would you go about making sure that gets? I mean, what can you think can be done to make that more prevalent if and when this is done?
Mm-hmm. That's a very, very interesting question, and I think that it's a tough one, Dan, because you're not going to be able to tell, but you can tell for the most part. Like I remember this one news agency, the lady had a I think it was she had anyway she had a flag in her background, like she was sitting at her desk and there was a flag other than the Ethiopian flag, right? So then that should make you wonder, okay, well, what flag is that? And what, she could have even brought it up in the conversation of the, in the interview, because her affiliation with a certain type of ethnic political group means that she has certain affiliations automatically. And so it would disqualify her from discussing certain things, but it's in the background. They're not hiding, and no one's hiding these things for the most part. Of course, there are some people who might have certain biases, and you need to consider that, and we just need to acknowledge it. That's what I'm saying. Acknowledge it up front, mm-hmm. And there will be signs there that show, okay, yeah, well, this person is from this area, so they might have a certain lean. Let's just acknowledge that. You know what I mean? In all honesty, when we're talking about how somebody's perception will affect what they're, the content of whatever stance that they take is what
so not unlike what's done when there's political discussions in the United States. There's a D or an R assigned to somebody when they're discussing a political situation. Identify the person as being from a particular political, or as you put it, political ethnic.
Unfortunately, right now the way the political parties are set up are based on ethnicities, and you can look into, there's no ethnic federalism that has worked. I don't know, it always has a way of dismantling the nation. Of course, this needs a little more research, and we'll try and look into that, but it's the question is what, there are other questions about why it was implemented, but I don't want to go off topic because that needs its own article, Dan. But I'm just saying, generally speaking, you have to be aware of the fact that there are a lot of different groups who have a different affiliation, or they have partnerships with certain groups. Therefore, you have to acknowledge that when you're interviewing the person. And in most cases, just like, somebody will wear a red or blue tie, right? Okay, that's what there are little signs, right? And we're familiar with those little signs here. And I think it's important for people who are covering that region and the topics to also be familiar with what are those little signs, right? And
so
that's the thing.
Okay, now your audience is the Ethiopian community in diaspora,
right,
outside of the country.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to assume, and you can correct me on this, that these political ethnic divisions also exist within the diaspora. How do you address that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And for me, I feel like that's why if you cover a wide range of topics, and for me, instead of just politics, because most of the media right now will have a personal brand, right? They have a personal brand, and it's about their perspective, or it's about what they think about a specific, political topic. That's kind of how it's structured right now. So if you, or there are other networks that, like, they cover a wide range of topics, and so for those folks, people are not, they're more open to hearing what they have to say, right? So my thing here is that, first of all, let's try and address all of these erroneous narratives that are circulating in the media, right? And not in it's like I'm responding or a reactive manner, but let's just go ahead and get back to the basics. Doing different stories that give people a foundation of things that they can read about, And then you can like, oh, okay, you have a foundation. So now these different perspectives exist, but a perspective and just disinformation are two different things. And I would like to distinguish between those two as I'm writing, right? And so sometimes there's no basis for the things that people are trying to say because it's about brainwashing people and getting them to think, or again, the hate message piece where it's like, oh, I want, this is the outcome that I'm looking for, so I must take information and narratives and I need to feed certain people this kind of information so they have this perception of certain people. And that's where you incite genocide and all of these other destructive conflict issues. We call it conflict, but it's genocide that is going on there. So we cannot just like act like, oh, okay, it's not happening, or we give it another name so we don't have to address it, right? So all of these things are I think problematic today, and they're going to continue to be problematic if they're not addressed.
Okay, so again, your audience is the diaspora. You're trying to bring news of Ethiopia and it's all its complexity, music, culture, yes, politics.
Exactly. I can't shy away from that.
We can't shy away from it.
No.
To your viewers.
Yes.
What about covering the diaspora community itself? I noticed that, in Mosab Times, you did talk about some of the ceremonies and events that local Ethiopian communities have done with parties and different events. Is this going to be like a co-equal part of importance for your coverage? Or how are you looking at that
Yeah, the
situation?
answer is yes, because it's like for instance, the Ethiopian soccer tournament I went and I did the pre-article. Now, I mean, I'll do the post article and add, images and different things that went on. And kind of like within that scope, be able to talk about a lot of different things, because in addition to soccer, there's this whole thing of a business community. And like, and my tagline for the online magazine is linking ancient times to contemporary minds, right? And I picked that because I feel like, just the whole multi-generational, dialogue that is necessary. Because even within the generations, there's such a big divide about how they even see. Like if you talk to, like my father's generation, no matter what ethnic group they come from, generally they have a very strong sense of nationalism, right? And a strong sense of nationality that they do not like what is happening to their country and how it's being dismantled, and so there. Dan, are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So I'm just saying that the generational thing is also there. And so it's very complex. And so I'm just trying to unpack some of these things through different events. And again, getting back to the Ethiopian soccer tournament thing, the Ethiopian, they are used to being merchants, right? So there's all these trade routes. So like this is the same thing that they're doing in the US. It's interesting because they have all these they've created pretty much trade routes within the US where they go and they sell their merchandise, or they might bring things from Ethiopia or things that they design here. So that whole trade route and business community thing is very strong here. And so that's a good thing. And I want to focus on that and build a business community. So, my background is also in business. And so I want to work on, connecting people, because I think if we start to, if we look at the bigger picture and we see how much the ancient and that ancient identity is also there, then we can stop looking at something for this past 30 years, right? Because it's the past 30 years pretty much that has caused people to and not to say there was no conflict before, but like to be this divided, right? So why not we just let's look at we have a long history. So why should we focus on just 30, 40 years, right? So I'm saying, hey, let's look at who we are, from ancient days up to now, and kind of consider those things as well as a people. So, and one other thing that I want to do is one of the biggest issues I've had, I told you about what mainstream media and some of the issues that I saw there. But let me go back and talk about how journalists in Ethiopia get locked up, and they're just, if they say something that doesn't really jive well with the government, end up in prison. And I mean, I believe that they make such a sacrifice for their society. They go out and they find out what's going on, and then they report it. I mean, I'm talking about the actual journalists, not the real folks, not the people who are involved in, I guess, circulating erroneous narratives and hate speech and things like that. I'm talking about real journalists who cover something, they identify an issue about what's going on, they report on it, and then they end up in jail. And it's not fair. Like, their families get completely derailed. All of these things are happening on a regular basis. And so, I really want to also contribute to, first of all, a standard of news telling that I also want to, share with our community, so that others can, get in the habit of putting on a lower third. Don't just throw a picture up there. Having your news translated in English or other international languages, so the outside of your nation, outside of your country and society, can hear what's going on, because it's so inward. The other thing is, like, in terms of the safety of the people, I would like to also, Article 29 of the Constitution states that people should have the right to report their media about what's going on in their country. So I'm saying, hey, how do we help that dialogue happen, since everybody seems to be negotiating at this time, right? Because, I mean, the current government negotiates with everyone, right? Even if you're a criminal, I mean, a war criminal, they negotiate with them. So if they can negotiate with all these people, we should also be negotiating Article 29. Maybe, start a chapter of SPJ there in Addis Ababa, so that we can start having a conversation with the government and saying, hey, look, you got to stop throwing these journalists in jail. It's getting played out. Like, it is getting played out. We need to kind of like nip this in the bud.
Right. Now, I mean, you do know, of course, that, Reporters Without Borders, Committee to Protect Journalists, they do keep tabs. They have a much better staff. They do report on it, but I don't see it coming out as often as it should. Maybe you can help us make sure that the message gets out, so that we may not be able to help them physically or financially, but we can help get the message out, so that the rest of the world knows about the problems that our colleagues in Ethiopia are facing, and the threats that they are facing to doing their work. So maybe, hopefully we'll be able to work together on some projects, or making sure that we have at least regular notices about what's happening there.
Definitely, because that's an important thing that I want to be a part of that dialogue, to make sure that people, who are serving their community in that way, they need some sort of outlet, and someone needs to be yelling. I remember when the 8 bloggers that it was called back in, like, I don't know, it was early, maybe 2006, 2007. There was a lot of support in that, and I just don't see that anymore. And if wherever it went, we need to get it back, because it's still out.
Right. I just want to do one more thing, just a last question here, on the community, covering the communities in the U.S. or outside of the country, the diaspora.
Mhm.
There are publications for immigrant Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipinos, and Haitians. These news organizations cater to the local communities. You're attempting to do something similar with the Ethiopian community. I see it so often that these publications have to be created because these communities are being ignored by the mainstream local press. And again, we have budget constraints that prevent, coverage on a day-to-day basis. But it seems that publications, news stations, radio stations, television stations, they could do better. Do you have any suggestions for local media?
Mhm.
Again, remembering they have budget constraints. Any
Sure.
suggestions at all of how they might be able to step up their coverage for local communities, in local immigrant communities?
Mhm, mhm. Well, so in order, you can't report on, like, I wouldn't feel confident about reporting on things that I know or someone that I trust, right? So like it has to do with the relationships you have and the fact that, unless you expand your relationships with different people in these communities and you know about these communities, you won't ever feel comfortable reporting about it, because I don't want to write about something just of only research, something I need to have to see something and understand how it's affecting that particular community for me to feel comfortable enough to say, to come up with 500 words or 1,000 words. Otherwise, I'm not speaking from a place of understanding. I'm just, that's where the problem is. The disconnect is putting all these different. So I think it has to do with, first of all, having a relationship with people who are in different communities and see who you can actually work with, and then maybe partnership with those, whether it's like, even for the Mosab Times, I'm happy to partnership with other folks too, and share information about our community and give them, like the full scope, pretty much, so they understand, regardless of who they're talking to or other people they're talking to just keep certain things in mind, because people, they present themselves, as being non-biased, but the fact is, we are all biased to a certain degree. So can you understand what are the different, have an understanding of what's going on in that country, read up on it, try and educate yourself, and then understand the geopolitics of the region in general, right? So like, even when I say Ethiopian diaspora, you have to understand, I'm going to talk about things that affect the whole Eastern, East Africa corridor. It won't, like, I'll talk about what's going on in Sudan as well, because all of the policies, and whether it's business or whether it's governmental, all of these things, foreign policy, or what's going on internally in the country, both are things that, impact each country, right? So there's no way for us not to talk about. I wouldn't just focus on Ethiopia, I can tell you that.
Mhm.
It is my target, is my focus, because that's what I know, but I'm ready to expand into the, East Africa in general, right? In different ways, right? Because I know I have relationships with people from these different communities, so then I can, hey, you know what, please help us understand what's going on, what do these different groups represent, what does this mean, even the article I did about the Eastern route, it helped me understand what's going on in Yemen, and like why, the conflict in Yemen and the Saudi backed soldiers versus the other group, having that understanding really expands your ability to bring someone and, hey, can you talk about this thing? And then, I know that so which group do you represent, and what does that mean for how you're going to tell me what's going on? So
Mhm. And but I mean, also just looking at the local publications, local news organizations, they want local news. There are events, there are programs,
right,
that every immigrant
plug into.
community does.
Mhm.
And to understand why those particular events are important, I think you said it best. You have to reach out and you have to understand.
Mhm.
And that's what I would encourage more local news organizations to add an international flair to their coverage.
Absolutely.
Sometimes all they have to do is go 3 blocks from their offices.
Or even LinkedIn will tell you who's in your local area, what
Right.
they're doing. There's no, right now, it's not hard. Like, if I, even when I'm looking at, like the Ethiopians in Israel, for instance, right? I want to hear from them, because I feel like some groups even forget about what it looks like from outside communities, even internally. Some groups tend to be isolated. Okay, well, let's bring them in the conversation. And when there's an event or some sort of holiday, we can talk about those things, right? So it's like, so that all of us, we understand the bigger picture. That's, I'm really big on the big picture, giving a foundation and then breaking down and telling individual stories. So
Yeah.
that's my way of telling the story, so that people, okay, yeah, it's like, don't think you're that different. We're all very, it's like, it's the human experience, right?
Right,
We
right.
just happen to be born in a certain place. I mean, I really feel this and believe this to be very true. Whether she's Somalian or, Sudanese or anywhere in the world. Basically, we just, our parents or some our family decided to stay in one particular spot, and then yours maybe had migrated somewhere else. That's pretty much the difference between different, people, generally speaking, and humanity. Just one decided to migrate somewhere else, and then we all have a starting place, right? So
So
I think that's what it is for me. That's how I see humanity.
the title of this is an IC short, an international community short, and we're getting a little long here.
Okay, all
So
right. Well, I want to tell you one thing
but
about my
I
online
just want
magazine.
just any
Mhm.
do you have any last words?
I
That's
do,
all.
I do.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about why I picked Mosab, which is also Mosab. If you see that gold structure, it's the same thing that you see in the restaurants, right? The logo. And you take the top off. It's about storage and food storage. It's about the way the apparatus that we use to serve food, right? So that right there is I use that as a symbol of kind of the apparatus I'm using to share stories. And that's when people sit together and they eat together on that large tray in that Mosab. That's why I called it Mosab. So Mosab times, because you sit around. So that's the reason why I use that as my logo. And then I have a lioness face in that, which represents just kind of like I guess ancient and past times and things like that. That's a big symbol in our culture. And so I wanted to connect it with that. Pretty much, the whole, you understand the story about the whole line of Judah and these things that are very part of our identity. So that's why I have that there. But Mosab is used in so many different African cultures, but especially, like even the tangine, for the Morocco, they don't have the bottom piece. It's made out of clay. I mean, regardless of where you go, most of them, they have some form of basket. And
Mhm.
so I think that is why I chose that. But moving forward, I'm gonna have a strong, I wish to have a strong business community, because I think business is really what connects us. It allows us to share our ideas and our entrepreneurship and that old merchant thing that we do with trade routes and all that. So I'm looking forward to that as my next section. So.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about your new organization, and also about the issue of getting more coverage for immigrant communities in the media, and how that all ties to global issues as well.
Definitely. We
So
got to we definitely have to interact with each other more and understand each other's pain points, and kind of like, that's the only way that we can bring about any kind of constructive change, I think so.
so we'll have the link for your site in our next newsletter. I'll include it with this YouTube.
Thank you.
Again, Sadie, thank you very much
Okay.
for being here.
Thank you for having me.